I will do it for myself. So I'm Nicolas Besombes. So I'm a sports sociologist at the Université Paris Cité. And since now 10 years, I'm working on esports. This is my main research object. And I'm really happy today to have been asked to present our work that we are leading with Tobias and Seth. So I will let them presenting themselves. So maybe Seth first.
Okay, sure. Hi, I'm Dr. Seth Jenny. I teach at Slippery Rock University in Pennsylvania, United States, in the Department of Exercise Science and Athletic Training. I've been doing video gaming and esports research since about 2011, starting in integration of physical education and how you can include video gaming into instruction and into pedagogy, and more recently in esports. And even more recently, the three of us have been working with a few other colleagues on the Rutledge Handbook of Esports. And two of the chapters of that book, one is defining and spelling esports, and another chapter is esports in the Olympics. And that hopefully will be out next year, but we'll be covering a lot of content that is in those two chapters. But I help facilitate the esports club, which is a collegiate esports team. And yeah, we'll pass it on to Toby.
Yeah, thank you for that. Tobias Scholz from the University of Agder in Norway. My background is business administration, but I landed at the Faculty of Engineering because they have a professorship for academic esports. So that is my research topic for a long, long time. So that's the part where I'm looking at it. And yeah, that's why Nico, Seth and I are also looking at the idea of esports, sports, and how to deal with the Olympic movement. But before that, I think that the most important part to start with, what are actually those differences if we are talking about video games, virtual sports, and esports? You probably know that as well. If it would be easy, we would have a definition. So that's the part where, Jim Perry as well knows that very well. It's not that easy, but that was something where when we looked at the handbook, how do we define esports in a way that is encapsulating everything? And we found one kind of definition. You can definitely debate about it, that it's not that precise, but the idea was to get everything of esports encompassed in that. So it is done by Seth, Nico, and Nepomuk Nothelfer to find a definition that is also dealing with kind of out of the picture games that can be called an esports. So what did we find out? So we say in the handbook, esports is an organized and codified competition between human players using video games. So first of all, it is competition. Second of all, it has some form of organization or code. Naturally, in video games, organization is automatically because it's digitally, but that there is some written code somewhere. And third of all, between human players. Esports is not AI against AI. That will be something else. So that's the general definition. But if we are looking further, what that actually means, if we are looking at video gaming, that is something the International Olympic Committee already started in discussing that. Also something you can debate about it, but to give a general assumption or general ground for us to talk about it, there's the classification of that there are casual games, games for recreation, games that you are just playing around, that don't have a competitive element. Maybe you heard some of the games, Minecraft, Animal Crossing. there's not a goal to achieve that is in a competitive way. Esports, it's the competition. So the goal is to beat the opponent. And that's something which is really core of the game. So there is no other purpose in League of Legends than to win against an opponent. For sure, those are games that are played at a keyboard, with a mouse, with a controller, most of the time in a seated position. That is the part where we see most of the time it's the hands that need to do a lot of stuff. If you think about StarCraft with 300 beats per minute, so 300 times you're clicking on the keyboard, but that's the core focus. So if we're looking at virtual sports, so video games that are replicating a sport, we also have the idea that there is a difference between those with a non-physical and with a physical. So the non-physical, those are the games you all know, FIFA, NBA 2K, or EA Sports FC nowadays, but it's the part where you are playing with a console, with a controller, with a mouse, those video games or that replicate a sport. Then there are the physical virtual sports. We saw a lot of them at the Olympic Esports Week, but that's where Nico was talking later on. But those are the Swift, World Rowing, Just Dance. So you are doing something, but you are digitally augmented. So you are playing against a computer or a device, but you are doing the physical movements. And that is a really important definition to understand, that we have those different kinds of ideas, but it's still not that simple. You know it from traditional sports that you have the pyramid, where on the lowest level, the casual players playing football on a field or something, and on the top you see the Bundesliga, the Premier League and everything. It's not that simple in esports, because you're for sure everybody's playing a video game, but the barriers between it are relatively vague. So that's why we designed this in a diagram that is like a pyramid as well, but you're looking from the top. So you have the idea of casual esports, amateur, semi-pro, when there are the first professional structures, but also the professional esports. Though you have to see in esports, you can skip a lot of levels. So if you are playing at home as a 16-year-old kid and you are just a natural, you could be on the stage of the next World's Finals if you are that talented. But that's making it difficult. But also here, if you see it, we have esports, we have the non-physical virtual sports, and the physical virtual sports, where in esports, we see a development that is more sportified. So they are borrowing a lot of ideas, concepts, and everything from the traditional sports. On a picture, you see the jerseys. Think about it, that that player is only seen from the front. So if I would have my name back there, you would not see it. Same here. But still, it's the idea to go towards the traditional sports because it's working there. With the non-physical virtual sports, you see here, the sport is transformed into bits and bytes. So everything which happens there is translated into the video game. And if you look at the newest FIFA, NHL, NBA, or whatever game, they are getting more and more photorealistic. So it's kind of mind-blowing how it much changed. When I remember I played NHL 1997 and was pixel blocks. And nowadays you know how they look. And the physical virtual sports, sport is digitized. So you use tools to have a virtual environment where you see on the picture now, it's the Swift tool where you are driving on a virtual field, even though you are cycling. So it's the similar thing of sport into video games. And so, yeah, you see from video games are moving to sports because there's a lot to learn from. But also you see that sports is moving more and more into video games, also just from the idea that we are getting more and more digital. And the Olympic Esports Week showed a lot what is already possible. Yeah, and that is also something when we look at, I think it's Taekwondo, the next picture. Yeah. Which is absolutely fascinating to see. That person is playing, as you see in the screen back there, is playing virtual Taekwondo, has all the elements on it, all the movement on it, and therefore it is relatively fluent, the border. So is this a sports or is this an esports? Yes and yes. And that is the part where you see virtual Taekwondo is a physical sport, motion-based video game, but also it's a simulation of a sport, but also it's an esport as it is in competition. And this is the part where I give the hand to Seth.
Yeah. I'm going to give Jim Perry some ammunition here when he gets to talk. So can you go back to slide our definition? I just want to just even present to everyone how even within the three of us, we have differing opinions across things. And so you can see codified is bolded, and that really our definition emphasizes that esports, different from video gaming, has in-game rules and codes of conduct, and also out-of-game rules and codes of conduct, such as contracts and potentially drug testing and brackets and all of those outside of regular competition within the organized gameplay that the game publishers have inherently in the game. If you go to the next slide, when you look at here, those virtual sports and non-virtual sports and physical virtual sports, those are terms created by the IOC. I would love to understand why it's non-physical virtual sport, because you are physically moving to manipulate the keyboard and mouse. And so that's that sort of term I'm not 100% on board with, but that's something that is used in IOC. And I see Jim writing his notes down. Go to the next slide. No, go back one. So even like here where Toby's got the various levels of esports, and I think some of the like the casual and the amateur could be blended in with what I would call recreational video gaming, because if they don't have out of game rules or things that have to be followed by all the players, such as contracts and codes of conduct and things like that, then that might still be considered video gaming. And if you go to the next slide, yeah, all right. So that's sort of, I wanted to go in the soapbox, give my 2 cents about those slides, and I think we can go to slide 9 to talk about to what extent esports is a sport. Well, actually, go back one. I'll give one more thought about the Taekwondo. Some people will say, you know, if you look at that guy who's kicking right there, why do the virtual form of it? Why not just do the quote unquote real version of it? Why does it need to be digitally augmented for the motion-based versions of it? And I think Nico will get into more details about some of the positives of some of the digitalization, but that's sort of a counter argument to some of the physical virtual sports for it. All right, so I'll talk about, you can go to the next slide. To what extent esports is a sport? So Gutman was a sociologist and Suits is a sport philosopher. When you combine and look at what are the main characteristics of sport across the sociological and physiological characteristics of sport, here's some of the main characteristics of what these two philosophers see as the components of a sport. And the first one is play forms the basis of sports. And when we look in the justification column, it's to what extent does esports fulfill that component? And certainly players will voluntarily play a lot of times for enjoyment. Now, at the professional level, that might not be their only reason. It might be their job, but certainly for the most part, people play esports because it is inherently fun and they enjoy doing so. The second component, sports are organized with rules. And certainly, as we discussed, we have in-game rules that is within the game that the game publishers have created that, due to coding and computer coding, you have to fulfill and use that. Now, there's also out-of-game rules for esports competitions, and those can include things such as contracts, game modes being played, brackets, prize purses, drug testing, things like that, that then brings it beyond the level of just recreationally having fun playing video games, but now it's a more codified environment, which brings it to esports. And then esports include competition. So certainly at the end of competitive event, now here's sort of the things where people who tend to be less familiar with esports might not realize the skill involved in esports. So certainly sports require skill, and within esports, you are having to manipulate a keyboard and mouse or a controller in a timely fashion. It needs to be sequenced. It needs to be accurate. There's strategy involved. And so there's certainly a lot of cognitive components, but the next component is to what extent is physical skills required to play esports. And that's where you have a lot of people who have a problem with it being in the Olympics. Is some people view esports as being a sedentary activity. To perform at the highest level of esports, I mean, players incur physical injuries because they have physical movements and they are fine motor movements. And a lot of times when people think of sports, they think of large gross motor physical activities. When you're running down a soccer pitch or swinging a baseball bat or swinging a golf club, those are using large muscle groups, and they don't necessarily think about sports that require fine motor movements, such as an Olympic sport since 1896, shooting, target shooting. You are trying to stay still as possible, and all you're doing is moving your index finger to shoot. Archery, beyond pulling back the bow, again, that is an Olympic sport since 1900. All you're doing is trying to stay as least amount of movement as possible, and then you have the fine motor movement of the release of the bow. And those are activities that everybody would agree on as sports, but historically, esports haven't been around for 100 years, and so it's not ingrained in the culture that esports is a sport. I think another unique aspect that you can think about is motor racing or equestrian, riding a horse sport, when the human is not actually the driving force of the movement. If it, is NASCAR, Formula One a sport when the human is just sitting somewhere or riding a horse? And a term that we are using is outsourced performance sports, where the driving motion of it is something else. And you can think about esports and the digital aspects of driving some of that movement with the digital avatars. I think we're all on the call here. We realize that esports is a broad following. It's not just a fad that's a passing thing, that it's very large. And that's another characteristic that people will commonly accept as a sport. And then here's where esports tend to have issues or problems, is whether it is institutionalized. And the problem being that the intellectual property is owned by the game publishers. If you want to have a basketball event, you don't need to contact James Naismith, the inventor of basketball, and ask him and to pay him a fee to play a game of basketball. But because the game publishers own the intellectual property, there's different entities that have come forward to try to regulate and institutionalize esports, but they don't really have the power because that lies with the game publisher and there needs to be partnerships with it. So those are some of the main characteristics of esports, and esports certainly satisfies the majority of them, but we're still working through some of those components.
For me, this is my part. Okay. Thank you, Pierre. Of course, if you have any questions or if you want to comment anything that Seth or Tobias has already said, do not hesitate to write your comments or your question in the discussion part or in the Q&A part. We will be glad to actually discuss about every concept, every conception that we get about esports. The third part that we want to address with this presentation is, of course, we tried first of all to set what is esports, what is the difference between gaming and esports and virtual sports, and in the second time, is esports a kind of sport or a sport? Is when we are thinking, and this is the conclusion of Seth, is that esports is very close to a sport, but regarding the institutionalization process, it's actually where we can see a huge difference between the intellectual property of a game and the federal model of the sports governance right now. Is when we are thinking about the major institution regarding sports, it's of course, obviously, the International Olympic Committee. And where we are speaking about the institutionalization of esports, we can't just avoid this question of esports within the Olympics, within the Olympic Games, or within the Olympic movement. And what I will try to do is to show you and explain you what are the common barriers and obstacles that we observed regarding this integration of esports within the Olympic movement. And we try with Seth and Sam Schellhut, a colleague of us, to propose some solution regarding these common barriers. The first one we identified is the fact that, and Thomas Barr, the president of the IOC, it has been one of his main topics regarding the limit from esports to its integration in the Olympic Games, is the question of the violent content of some games, and the inadequation with the Olympic Games values. Of course, the philosophy of the Olympics is to further peace and to reduce violence. What we could argue is the fact that even in the Olympics, there are some sports like boxing that incorporates real violence, and where the rules actually contain that winning may include striking an opponent unconscious. And however, in esports, this violence, it's mostly simulated. You can't hit your opponent, but you can hit him virtually. But the solution that we can propose, of course, is to avoid selecting every video games which simulate an armed conflict or a combat scenario like Counter-Strike. Now we are in Counter-Strike 2, which has been released last month, and to, of course, avoid any scenario with firearms, with explosive, with terms like terrorists, like bombs, and so on and so on. This is why I've put a picture of another game, which is a shooting game, but nobody is thinking about this shooting game. It's called Splatoon, and this is more a shooting game with paint, and it's more, as you can see, very colorful. It's dedicated for children. So it's not the mechanic of the first-person shooter, which is actually the main issue or the main concern, because as you can see, with a first-person shooter, you can also have something that is totally different from an armed conflict. But this is what you actually visualize on the screen. The second barrier is regarding the competitive integrity and the ethics of esports. There are many concerns. Of course, we know that for the Olympics, equity, fairness is very important for the Olympic movement. And even though there are some scandals, of course, within the Olympic movement, but in esports, as esports is not governed like in sport, for example, and we will come back to this governance issue or concern a little bit later. But we have the same issue regarding a lack of governance, problem with cheating in esports, hacking, using unauthorized softwares, and of course match fixing and doping. This is where there is a need for the relevant stakeholders from the esports ecosystem and from the Olympic movement to create and maintain these fair play standards. And for example, regarding everything regarding doping, there is a need to test protocol for all participants. The third barrier is what we can say or call the public relations strategy regarding esports. What we can say is that in the common imagination or representation, the esports players are mostly associated to the image of a geek, of a nerd, someone who is unhealthy, socially awkward, or unskillful. And of course, esports is receiving less mainstream media coverage compared to traditional Olympic game sports. And there is also another barrier. It's regarding the way that commentators, broadcasters are not speaking to the level of the viewers. It's for someone who is not familiar to esports, when you are watching a game, when you are listening to a game, it's very difficult to understand what is the sporting dimension, what is the athleticism in esports. And so the solution would be to focus more on professionalism, on game knowledge, on skill required, and maybe to try to debunk all the stereotypes regarding esports. So, for example, on this picture on the right, this is Pasha Biceps, who is a famous Counter-Strike player and very famous for his performance within the game as one of the greatest Counter-Strike player in the history, but also someone who has developed through the years a real a great hygiene of life, with an attention that is dedicated to sleep behavior, to nutritional behaviors, to physical and mental preparation, and so on and so on. Another barrier is, as Seth mentioned it a little bit earlier, this is the physicality. Most of the opponents to esports argue that esports is lacking of physicality to actually there is one researcher called Emma Witkowski. She's saying that physicality is the Achilles, how should I say that? Le talon d'Achille, I don't remember, but this is where everybody is actually pointing out that this is where esports is not fitting into the definition of sport. But as Seth mentioned it a little bit earlier, there are many actually Olympic sports like rifle shooting, like archery, like golf, like curling, that are not requiring strength or they are not requiring gross motor skills, but mostly fine motor skill, dexterity, concentration, focus. And what we can say is that the way that most of the esports games that are played competitively, most of these games require the same kind of skills and physical skills that we can find, for example, in rifle shooting or in curling or in what I use mostly is table football. So in French, we call that baby-foot, but this is exactly the same. The field is symbolic. It could be virtual with esports, but with table football, it's the table. But at the end, you control the players, the avatars, or you control the character with your physical actions. And it has, it will have an impact on the realization, the success, the gain on the game or not. So the potential solution would be to blend esports and virtual sports offerings and to educate the audience on the fine motor skills that are required by esports. Another barrier is the association of esports with video game addiction. since 2018, the World Health Organization has recognized the gaming disorder, but some researchers have estimated that it was very rare, ranging from 1.4 to 3.3% of all the worldwide population that is playing video games. So it's existing. There is something like problematic gaming, compulsive gaming, which is mostly related to negative conditions such as depression, impulsivity, or academic decline. And what we propose is to make the distinction between compulsive gaming and intensive esports practice. When you want to perform at the highest level, you have to be totally involved of your time. You have to make concessions, maybe sometimes sacrifices to perform at the highest level. If you just look at the Olympian sports athletes, they are doing a lot of sacrifices to attain their highest level, and this is something very close to esports. The best player in the world, if they want to achieve their goals of winning a world championship, they need to make the sacrifices, and this is totally different between intensive esports and compulsive gaming. So what we propose is to monitor research in this area and to establish standards for esports, Olympic Games player welfare and rights. And Seth, you want to add something?
I was just wondering if you thought Kobe Bryant had a basketball addiction.
Yeah, this is exactly. I think that he was really mad about basketball, and most of his teammates said he was very special about that. He was kind of a little bit a freak of basketball. So yeah. Another barrier is regarding online harassment. As Tobias mentioned it earlier, esports is by nature, it's in its own DNA to be digital. So everything is online, everything is digital, and online harassment, of course, which involves, of course, tactics to repeatedly cause harm to others using digital technology. And it could include hate speech, cyberbullying, public shaming, trolling, doxing, and so on, is totally at the opposite of the Olympic values. And there is something, this is something that the esports stakeholders need to address. And this is where we propose, of course, to educate first the players that there is no difference between their online identity and their real life identity, but also to control during the competition all the discourses and the behaviors that are that are made and by the players, and to sanction, so enforce penalties for rule breakers. And for what we know right now, the IOC is working on a safeguarding tool using AI, artificial intelligence, and this is where it could really help esports to avoid this kind of behaviors and discourses. Another barrier is the gender inequality in esports. This is something sports is working on since now many decades. These two pictures for me are very, they are speaking for themselves. On the left, both are coming from the same game, which is Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which is a fighting game. And on the left side, you have, it's coming from a mixed competition, as we said, so everybody can participate. But as you can see, even the players and the spectators, the viewers, all of them are men, and it's very male-centric. And on the right, you have an initiative that is led by the Smash Sisters, so dedicated to this specific game. And these are safe competitions dedicated to players who are women or who identify themselves as women. And as you can see, players and viewers and spectators are women. So we can promote female and non-binary events, to promote mixed gender events as options, and of course to ensure gender discrimination is not tolerated. as I said, something very different and Seth mentioned it earlier, something very different between esports and sports. This is the governance, the governing model. And with esports, there is the publisher who is the intellectual property owner. So in esports, there is no central global governing structure. It doesn't exist. We don't have a federation, an international federation. And to be totally transparent and clear, actually, there are 7 international federations in esports at the global level. And all of them are self-proclaimed. So they are all saying that they are the main esports federation. But right now, in esports, the only governing body for each game is the regulator, is the publisher, the publisher owning the intellectual property of their game. And this is why on the left side, I put, as Seth and Tobias mentioned it, the pyramidal model of sports with the grassroots level on the base of the pyramid, and at the top level, the top side, the national federation, and after the international federation, and after the global association of all the international sports federation. So it's very a pyramidal model, but in esports, as you can see on the right, what is at the center of the ecosystem? These are video games and the publishers. So it's not a pyramidal model right now, but it's more a network model. So you have the publishers, and everybody is connected to the publisher. The franchise are connected to the publisher. Players are connected to the publisher. Brands, fans, tournaments organizers, broadcast and media. Everybody is connected to the publisher. So the potential solution would be to have all the stakeholders, including the publishers, have to collaborate to create a legitimate governing structure to standardize, to oversee competition, while integrating a revenue sharing plan, because right now all the value of this ecosystem is gathered by the publisher.
Maybe here to add on that, if we are moving into the virtual sports environment, this problem will emerge as well. So it is something where, from a legal perspective, at some point, the developers of those games for virtual taekwondo or something else could enforce their intellectual property rights on that as well. So it is important to deal with that issue, even though maybe the Olympic Games want nothing to do with traditional esports. That problem will emerge in terms of digitalization.
Of course, and right now we can see it with the FIFA and the game FIFA. So the publisher of the game FIFA, Electronic Arts, decided that they won't pay more to have the license of all the players, the football players that are actually within the FIFA, the International Sports Federation. So the FIFA decided to create its own game maybe later. And what we can see is that the International Sports Federation is not able to create a game. This is not their job. They don't have the skills to do it. And the publisher just decided to let the name FIFA and to carry on to release a new game called now Electronic Arts Football Club, which is exactly the same game. But at one point, you can't be in conflict with the intellectual property owner. It can't match. This is where I think the better metaphor to compare the best comparison is mostly with music or movie industry. For example, with the movie industry, if you want to, I don't know, share the Avengers DVD, you won't be surprised if Marvel sends you an email saying, you can't do that. This is our movie. This is our intellectual property, which is very normal because they have invested a lot of money and a lot of creativity to create this movie. For gaming, this is the same. Electronic Arts has invested a lot of money, a lot of creativity to create the game of football that simulates football, but this is their own intellectual property. So yeah, I carry on with another barrier is and it will be the last actually. when you want to add a new sport within the Olympic Games, you have to keep in mind that the Summer Olympic Games, it's 10,500 athletes maximum. So if you add a new sport, it means that you will add new athletes. So if you add new athletes, you will have to remove some athletes from another sport. So this is what happened, for example, when you add, I don't know, speed climbing or climbing to the new edition of the Summer Olympic Games. At one point, it means that you need to delay or cancel an Olympic sport. And for example, canoe for two people, I don't know how you say in English, two-seated canoe, has disappeared from the Olympic Games right now. So the potential solution would be to create a separate Olympic esports event that is not an official Olympic Games sport. And this is what the IOC have done with the creation of the Olympic Esports Series, which is one of the 4 pillars of the Olympic Esports Week. There is a last barrier or a last concern when you think about involve or integrating esports within the Olympic movement is how you choose the right video game to integrate. This is the same as what are the criteria to integrate a specific sport within the Olympic Games. So this is a non-exhaustive list of what could be taken as suggested criteria. The global popularity of the game, so it means the number of users and spectators worldwide of this game. The play format is the game an individual game or a team-based game? The gaming platform, is it a PC game, a console game, or a mobile game? And right now we know that at the global level, mobile games are really growing very, very in a huge way, more than PC and console. Of course, the age rating, so the Ph.D. system for Europe or the ESRB classification for US can help to ensure that younger generation can participate. Of course, the ease of understanding of the game for novice audience, how you can be sure that most of the people that are not familiar with esports can engage and entertain watching the competition. The accessibility of all the digital infrastructures, because there are some regions of the globe in the world that are inequally deserved with internet. The local relevance of the game, for example, if you host a game in Europe, in Asia, or in North America, we don't play the same games in these different geographical areas. There are cultural specificities regarding esports. The longevity of the game, because games are moving, there are new games every year. So what we want is to ensure continuity of the game over time. So there are some games right now like Counter-Strike that are existing since more than 20 years, League of Legends more than 10 years. So it can be a criteria to think about. The competition schedules, of course, to avoid overlapping of existing esports tournaments, and especially for professional players. And so if you want to create a tournament and you want to have the best player, you want to be sure that they are not playing for another tournament. And of course, all the consideration regarding games that may conflict with Olympic sponsor, what we call the Olympic partners, the top, to avoid ambush marketing. So right now there are Olympic sponsor, and all these games are brands. So you don't want to give them some visibility that will go against another Olympic sponsor.
Can I add something onto that?
Yeah, sure.
So I think the first bullet point's really important, because when the Olympic Esports Week was announced, some of the titles that were being used were not very popular, and that tended to alienate, quote unquote, like diehard esports fans and players. And so choosing games that are globally popular is very important to try to attract esports fans and players, because they're familiar with those. And that, one way that they then tried to rectify that issue is that they added Fortnite later on as a second announcement to try to pull in a currently popular esports title. So that first bullet is pretty important.
Sure. I won't develop because tomorrow Florian Lefebvre will actually explain what are the good practices we can learn from the first edition of the Olympic Virtual Series by actually making interviews with stakeholders of this first edition, and he will mention the game that have been chosen for this event. I will go for the last part. It will be a little bit faster, and I won't dig very deep into the benefits of adopting esports and virtual sports in the Olympic movement. Just to let you know, just to introduce, most of the opponents of the integration of esports within the Olympic movement are saying that the Olympic movement needs esports more than esports need the Olympic movement. And with Seth and Tobias, we think that it's more nuanced. There are things that can be mutually beneficial for both the esports ecosystem / industry and the sports / Olympic movement. First, this is a non-exhaustive list of some examples of ways in which esports may, of course, positively assist the Olympic movement. So first of all, and this is what we try to show with Florian Lefebvre, it's that esports can help the Olympic movement to rejuvenate its own brand. Right now, what we know is that between London 2012 and Rio 2016, the audience have been getting older, and that there is a need to rejuvenate the brand. This is also a way to engage a new generation of fans. This is Belinda Winton, this New Zealand researcher, who showed how the new selection of this new discipline, these new sports like skateboarding, surfing, breaking, and so on, are actually part of a strategy of the Olympic movement to engage new generations. It's also a way for the Olympics to gauge interest into a new sector. So first, a new tech or gaming sector, but also a new geographical sector, like especially the Asian Pacific and Southeast Asia market, but also the Middle East market beyond the Western world. The way to reach these new markets, these new geographical areas for the Olympics. It's also a way for the Olympics to create a new partnership opportunities, like with very important brands like Tencent, Amazon, that are coming from the tech world. It's also a way to align with for the Olympics to align with the new sporting practices of the time. We think that one of the mission of the Olympics is to be the mirror of the sports and corporal activities of its own time. And during the first decades of the century, it was maybe athletics or track and fields, basketball, soccer. During the 70s, it was mostly what we call the Californian sports like surfing, skateboarding, windsurfing, BMX, and so on. Right now, we are in a period where it's mostly digital sports that are the mirror of our hyper-digitized societies. And lastly, it's a way for the Olympics to promote new strategy for digital engagement, of course. Since many years now, the Olympics is working on its digital strategy with the Olympic channel, with the Athlete 365 platform. And it's a way to enhance, to improve this strategy by adding esports. Where it's new, where we think we can add something with Seth and Tobias, it's to list some example of ways in which this time the Olympic movement can positively assist the esports ecosystem. What we can say is that Olympic Games are actually one of the Summer Olympic Games are one of the three major sports events in the world, with the World Cup soccer and the Super Bowl. So if esports reach the Olympic Games or reach the Olympic movement, it will instill legitimacy to esports. but it will also help to reach an older audience beyond the youth and the early adults, so the Gen Z, the Generation Z, and the Generation Millennials. Because right now, esports is very famous and attract a lot of people in the new generation, but at the end, their parents, they don't really know what this young generation are talking about. And to be involved and integrated in the Olympic movement, it's a way to reach this population. It's also a way to break down negative stereotypes associated with gaming. Of course, compulsive practice, violent content, physical inactivity, and to introduce values and tools to esports that the Olympic movement has advanced over time regarding ethics, regarding integrity, regarding governance, anti-doping, diversity, inclusion, health promotion, performance optimizations, and so on and so on. Right now, esports has a lot to learn from the sports world, from the Olympic movement. Of course, sports movement and Olympic movement are not totally white, but since decades and decades, they have improved some tools, they have worked on some specific topics, where esports, it's only in its infancy, and esports can learn a lot from the Olympic movement. So these are the two main references we actually that are the base of our demonstration right now of this presentation. So as Seth mentioned it at the beginning, this is the Routledge Handbook of Esports that the five of us are working on with Tom Brock and Amanda Coate. And these are two chapters, one dedicated to esports in the Olympics, and the other one is defining and spelling esports. So thank you very much. I'm really sorry if I've been a little bit too long, but if you have any question, we will be glad to try to answer it.
Thank you. Thank you. So if you, as Nicolas asked, if you have some comments to exchange with Nicolas, Tobias, Seth. Thank you for this to your three voice. It was the opportunity to develop some reflections about this increasing aspect about esports.
Yeah, I can see.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, Elvira.
Yeah, I did listen, but maybe I did not hear everything. I just wanted to know if you have ethical guidelines for different sports and eventually teaching programs on values.
That's a good question. Maybe Seth, you want to jump on it?
Well, I would say that one of the leaders in that area in esports, I saw Toby, you can add on to this, is the Esports Integrity Commission. The acronym is ESIC, ESIC. And so they have been working with varying governing bodies, tournaments organizers to develop ethical guidelines for esports competitions. And yeah, a lot of those things has to do with some of those barriers that we mentioned, where I certainly think that the esports could learn from the Olympic movement to try to institute policies, particularly in drug testing, some of the cognitive enhancing drugs that are commonly used in, well, I say commonly, that can be used in esports is one of the issues. But also there are other types of software issues in relation to integrity concerns within esports. Toby, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something where you always have to look at the idea that esports is not esports, but many various disciplines. So the idea of what may be, or the idea of values, especially if we are taking the drugs, it could be in one game like Counter-Strike being even counter-intuitive or harmful to use a certain drug. but in another game it is useful. So that's the part where we always have to align, like in sports. There's a difference in values in archery towards football. So that's always an issue where having a value for all esports is like the same values for sports, with sportsmanship, fair play, and that. And that's something where it's relatively vague. So that's the part where those teaching elements often depend on the genre, being a first-player shooter, fighting games, or MOBAs, because the specific of the titles are really important to reincorporate in that.
Yeah, and this is always something that is linked to the governance problem, the governance issue. The fact is, all these publishers are capitalistic companies that are trying to maximize their profit. So they will invest money where they will have a return of investment. So if for them, ethics and integrity is not a problem, they won't invest money, because behind that, after that, they won't have return of investment. So they are always trying to maximize their profits. So this is why we have this issue regarding, for example, grassroots esports in terms of lack of governance. It's because in sports, the federation see how it can be beneficial to put, to invest and to put some resources at the grassroots level for amateur sports, because it will help to detect, to train, and the new generation of elite athletes. In esports, it's not the same, because these capitalistic companies, they are looking at direct revenues. So they will invest money where they will have direct revenues. So if it's not a main issue, ethics and integrity, right now they won't invest money on it. This is why right now we see some independent, entities like the Esports Integrity Commission that are trying to help esports, but that are struggling to govern, to standardize, and to be legitimate for all the publishers that actually own these different intellectual properties.
Let me just add one more thing. I wouldn't let the ethical concerns be the reason why you wouldn't want to integrate esports into the Olympic movement. I think there's current Olympic sports that have more rampant ethical concerns. I'm a massive track and field fan, athletics. I think that the performances being done now, I don't think that those are being done cleanly. And so, I'm saying that I think there's other quote unquote sports that have more of a ethical problem right now than esports does.
Yeah, and also the part, if we are looking from a capitalistic perspective, that is something where you can talk with the publishers if you're taking something off their hands. So that is something where currently, most of the time, those discussions are not done. I know some publishers are not good to talk with, but others you can talk with. But it's always the issue where some of them are open. If you're telling, we are taking over grassroots esports, most of them are like, yeah, happy about that. It's not our business model either way. And that's the part where also we see this development of, if we're talking about digital society, this is normal. Someone is giving you the platform to use it. We are using Zoom. If we would have asked Zoom to help us with the incident before, Zoom would have said, your problem. And this is the part where there is a space to develop that. And if you're looking at the pyramid, at the moment, we have a blank space in the middle, which we need to bridge. And this is an important part where the publisher will stay for sure on the top, but they are also happy to have a grassroots, because that means more people are playing the game and more people are buying the stuff.